I'm going to ask you first, from 5 to 1, what you believe are the 5 most important offseason needs for the Minnesota Vikings, starting with number 5.
I think I would go with a cornerback would be an offseason need for them. I mean, they were able to get Byron Murphy Jr. last year and develop a Caleb Evans and draft Mekhi Blackman. And Blackman performed very well. For referencing PFF, he was one of the highest graded rookie corners in the league. And I think they've got a nice group there that they clearly could work with because they showed improvement. What they don't have is a dude. They don't have a shutdown guy. They don't have somebody that is, hey, if you watch the Super Bowl, a Trent McDuffie, a L'Jarius Sneed, they don't have a presence at that position. And I think that they need to find it. Now, whether that's free agency, the draft is going to be really interesting because there's a lot of moving parts to that. But I think what Brian Flores always had for his successful defenses, if you go back to Miami, where they had 2 very good corners, is that position is really, really important. And last year, I think Flores did a lot to try to mitigate issues with the corners rather than use them to his advantage. So they could really use somebody who's a difference maker there.
All right, number 4, the number 4 need you believe for the Minnesota Vikings this offseason.
I will go with left guard. This is a team that took a big step forward with their offensive line. They were one of the top 5 PFF pass blocking offensive lines last year, which has not been anywhere close to that in previous years. And so it was a big step forward. They have 2 of the best tackles in the league, solidified center position, but at the guard position overall, uncertainty. They drafted Ed Ingram 2 years ago. He took a step, but not a huge step last year. And then at left guard, Dalton Reisner is a free agent. They traded away Ezra Cleveland to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, so you could say left and right guard, depending on whether they buy into Ed Ingram and his development for next year. I think that they shouldn't. They should still be looking for competition for him, but they don't even have a starter at left guard. And there's nobody who's really in the pipeline. They have some quality depth offensive linemen. Some of them have to be re-signed, but I think they'll bring back guys like maybe Austin Schlottman or David Questenberry, but these are not starters at that position. And considering that they really struggled to run the football, Dalton Reisner might not be the best fit to bring back because he's not a top-notch run-blocking left guard. So that's something that they're going to have to find very likely in free agency.
Offseason need number 3.
Defensive tackle. Harrison Phillips is under contract, and not too many other players at the defensive tackle position. They had to play Jonathan Bullard over 600 snaps last year. That was the most that he had ever played in his career. And well, it was admirable for him to step up into that role. It's not ideal for somebody who's been much more of a 300 or 400 snap player to all of a sudden say this deep into their career, hey buddy, you got to go play every single snap. That was tough. And we saw both Harrison Phillips and Bullard wear down as the year went along. Now, they drafted Jaquelin Roy in the 5th round last year. He showed some flashes, but are we going to ask a 5th rounder who was just drafted last year to immediately step up into a starting role? Probably not. And ideally, you'd want to take some snap count away from Harrison Phillips and use him a little more situationally. They were asking him to be a straight up nose tackle last year. That's usually not been his role. He's more of been a run stuffing 3-tech who can get to the quarterback if necessary. They just kind of had to do it because they had nobody else. And I think that multiple defensive tackles are going to be needed. That is not a position in the NFL where you can usually just have one guy who plays 1,000 snaps. Most of the time, it's a rotational spot. We saw them get really trounced on the ground as the year went along toward the end of the season because those guys got worn down. So I think they desperately need defensive tackle.
The second most important need for the Minnesota Vikings this offseason is?
That would be the edge rusher position and outside linebacker, if you will, in Brian Flores' system. Danielle Hunter is a free agent. So is DJ Wonnum. Those were the guys who played the most. So is Marcus Davenport, who they signed last year as one of their splash signings, and then he barely played because of injury, and it's unclear whether they want to try to extend him or not, try to bring him back and hope that it works out better. He's had a pretty severe history of injuries in his career, so I'm not sure they want to do that. And now you're looking at Andre Carter is maybe the only guy under contract for the Vikings, and he was an undrafted free agent last year who played something like 67 snaps. They need everything on the edge. And this is another position, by the way, that you usually want four guys who can play. You get your stalwart, you get your TJ Watt style or Nick Bosa, and that guy's going to play every snap. But then you want other rotational guys coming in. You want to have versatile players who can rush up the middle if you want them to on a third down type of situation. And the Vikings just need to replace all these people. We don't know if Hunter is coming back. He has a pretty massive dead cap hit if he doesn't, but also they've messed with his contract numerous times, which makes me think he might want to hit the free agent market, see what he can get. DJ Wonnum is more of a rotational player who was forced into a significant role. There's just nothing there, nothing. So when we talk about needs, they need 6 to 7 defensive linemen to fill this thing out. That's a lot to ask in one offseason with only 2 top 100 draft picks. That's going to be a very difficult task. And yet somehow that's still only the number 2 need.
I think we all know what is the number 1 need for the Minnesota Vikings, but go ahead. Let us know, Matthew.
Indeed, it is quarterback. Kirk Cousins is a free agent, and there are options aplenty otherwise. But because Josh Dobbs randomly won a couple of games in the middle of the season, they draft 11th. Had he not, they'd be much more on the doorstep of being able to potentially trade up. Or if they really wanted McCarthy, Nix, whoever, they would be in the driver's seat rather than maybe leaving that to another team that needs a quarterback like the Giants, like the Falcons. And we'll know much more by the time we get to the draft of who actually needs quarterbacks and who is traded for Justin Fields or signed Baker Mayfield and so forth. So the Vikings have a lot to think about here. Do they try to get a quarterback at 11 and just wait to see who falls? Do they bring back Cousins? It hasn't really worked for them to go deep in the playoffs, and he's probably going to still be expensive. How do they fill out a defensive line if they're going to bring back a quarterback who at the very least would be $30-something million? That's a really difficult task. They are in a tough spot with this quarterback position, and it is by far, runaway, the number 1 need for them.